Welcome back. It's time for our faculty guest speaker. So if you've never been to Inspired Discoveries before, we always invite a member of the faculty at the University of Baltimore to share something about what they're doing. And this time, we've asked Dr. David Lingelbach. He's one of our senators on the Faculty Senate, of which I am the outgoing president. And he's got some really interesting and topical things that he's researching right now. So let me share a bio about him and his co-researcher, and then I will let them talk for about 30 minutes. And before I read the bio, I do just want to say, for this and only this segment of Inspired Discoveries this year, do the opposite of what you've been doing before. Please don't make comments or chat comments and save your questions to the end for a live Q&A, because this is the only presentation that is live, not pre-recorded like all the student presentations. David Lingelbach is a professor of entrepreneurship at the Merrick School of Business at the University of Baltimore. He was educated at MIT, the London School of Economics and Political Science, and the University of Exeter, from which he received a PhD. Prior to becoming an academic, David served in senior roles in finance and international development, including as the CEO of Bank of America's businesses in the former Soviet Union, which sounds fascinating. He's been a Fulbright Scholar to Myanmar/Burma in 2018-19 and a Fulbright Specialist to Colombia in 2021. David has twice been nominated for an Andrew Carnegie Fellowship. His co-researcher, Valentina Rodriguez Guerra, is thank you. Should have practiced. Is an author, oligarch researcher, and graduate student in business administration at the Facultad de Ciencias Económicas, Universidad Nacional de Colombia in Bogota. She has won awards from NASA and the Colombian Ministry of Education for her work, and currently works for the Comptroller General of Colombia as an investigator. Together, David and Valentina are regular contributors, opinion contributors to The Hill, America's second largest political news site, and one that I personally read often. And they write there about Vladimir Putin and oligarchs. So I assume they're going to tell us a little bit about that, but take it away, David and Valentina.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much. Valley and I are just delighted to be here today. It's really a lovely privilege to have been invited to share with you some of our thoughts about scholarship and research. And I'm going to go ahead and share some slides then, and then we'll get into it. Right. So this is going to be a slightly different presentation than you all have seen this morning, and it's also maybe a bit different from keynote addresses that Inspired Discoveries has done in the past. Valentina and I really value this kind of work that encourages undergraduates to pursue research and scholarship, and we thought that maybe the best way for us to talk about this a little bit is to share with you sort of our personal experiences as two researchers who have come together and kind of merged our paths, and how that's all been working out for us so far. And our motivation, by the way, for doing this, just to get us started, is that Valley's at the beginning of her academic career. I'm a little bit further on, but neither of us really ever had much guidance in the early stages as to what this life of being a scholar, a researcher, an academic was really like. What were the kind of the interior details of that life. So we're gonna kind of move in that direction today and share that with you. And specifically, we want to describe our individual paths to scholarship, and also, frankly, celebrate a little bit about how those paths came together and how we're kind of growing those paths of scholarship together. So let's start with who we are. Valentina and I know one another very well, and I know she's a little bit more shy than I am. So I will kick it off and maybe fill in a few additional details that I didn't share with Mike. and then Valley will contribute her piece. And I think of these as sort of being fun facts. So, you know, like a lot of students at the University of Baltimore, I am the first in my family to attend university. I grew up actually in Wisconsin, and was the first in my family to go away to school. When I was in my undergraduate degree at MIT, I studied Russian and I got recruited by the CIA to become a spy. So, and I think when I told Valentina this originally, she was kind of blown away by it. I did, however, at the last minute realize that this was not the greatest thing to do for me personally. So I backed out and I turned it down. But I did end up living in Russia for 5 years, where, as Mike mentioned, I ran a bank there. I also met and worked for about 2 years with the then pretty unknown Vladimir Putin. And when I ran a bank, you know, this is another fun fact. I lost one day over $1 billion. So you should always ask people, not in business particularly, how much money they've made, but also how much money they've lost. Why do I share this? I'm an atypical academic. I have kind of, you know, my road has been a very winding road to academia. And frankly, I think that's my competitive advantage as an academic. And I really wouldn't have it any other way. So let me stop. Valley, do you want to share some fun facts about you?
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, and we can.
Some fun facts about me. I'm not sure. I'm a major student here in Colombia. I was born here in Colombia. I speak both English and Spanish. I'm learning both German and French. I'm 22 years old, and I don't know what else to say.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I was going to say this later, but I guess I'll just say it now that you know, Valley is probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. And so one of the reasons that we're such good collaborators is that I know when to shut up and just let her decide what we should do next. Her judgment is impeccable, even though she's quite a bit younger than I am, and that it gives us quite an advantage as a research team. So, all right. With that background, let's turn next to kind of something that we're framing our talk around. So later this year, Valley and I are going to be publishing a book, and this is the latest mock-up of the cover of the book. It's entitled The Oligarch's Grip, Fusing Wealth and Power. This book is the product of more than 25 years of research and is really the first attempt that we're aware of to do sort of a global historical study of oligarchs, which have emerged as this sort of really important phenomenon in contemporary global society. And we, in this book, rely upon 16 case studies that Valley and I have developed. Actually, in the last few months, we've been making research trips to a couple different countries to kind of fill in the gaps. But these oligarchs that we talk about in the book are really everywhere. They're here in the States, but they're in other countries like Russia, South Africa, smaller countries like Lebanon and El Salvador. They're not just people who are heads of state. They're also people who influence policy agendas. And really, the ones that are most interesting are the ones that have changed how we think and act through technologies such as search, for example. And many of these people have net worths that exceed $1 billion. What's interesting for Valley and I is that they've really existed since ancient Greece. Both Aristotle and Plato wrote about them extensively, but somehow they've remained pretty ill-defined in scholarship. So we're trying to address this, and we think it's kind of cool stuff. It's been a big part of our lives for a while, but we think it's cool for the rest of us too, because you know, we are kind of living right now in the era of Putin and Trump, and so it's kind of important to understand what these people are like. Valley, do you want to add anything onto that? Is that a good description? No? Okay. Okay, great. So what we thought we would do is to organize our remarks around scholarship today using Joseph Campbell's powerful framework that describes the hero's journey. Um, some of you will know that Campbell was a literature professor for many years at Sarah Lawrence College, and he specialized in comparative mythology and religion. You know, his scholarship has been criticized, and frankly, so has ours. We really do admire Campbell as a public intellectual who has made a significant contribution to our understanding of how the world works. And in his most impactful study from which we're drawing here today, which is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Campbell used data from case studies, just like we do in our book, from the lives of people like Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, and others to map out this hero's journey. And so we're adopting this framework to kind of organize how we have been starting to think about our own journeys as scholars along the two winding roads that have brought us together. Scholars, Campbell's framework is very simple. It's got three parts to it: departure, initiation, and what we call coming home. In the departure phase, heroes and scholars are called to an adventure, a life of exploration and uncertainty. In the initiation phase, we find ourselves facing a variety of trials and ordeals and tests. And finally, when we come home, we experience a kind of a magical flight in which we are transported to a new level of understanding and perhaps get a chance to take another hero's journey from that newer level. This framework describes almost perfectly how Vali and I have pursued our lives as scholars. So we would like to kind of dig into the details a little bit to share with you what this looks like in practice. So I'll start with the departure phase. So for me, departure to the life of scholarship started in childhood. I was like one of these little science geek boys with thick glasses, and I had this dream, which was completely unrealistic, of becoming an astronaut, which was sort of inspired in part by my father, who was working on the Apollo space program. All of those dreams took me to MIT, which was a step closer to scholarship, where I was able to participate, just like many of you today are, in two undergraduate research projects in international relations. One was in migration, and the other one was in international conflict. Those research projects actually propelled me, at least, toward a PhD in history at Cambridge, and what seemed at that time as a 22-year-old to be a pretty traditional, boring academic career. But something sort of pulled me back, something inside of me, and I got some good advice at the same time from a senior statesman in Washington, D.C., a man some of you may know named James Baker, who basically said to me, get out in the real world and get some real knowledge, and then you can become a real academic. So that advice and my own sort of doubts about becoming a scholar at a young age sent me back into the private sector. I had an economics degree, and I ended up working in the US for a while until my big break came, and I was able to spend 5 years, which really were 5 golden years in post-communist Russia, running a bank, working with people like Putin, etc. And all of that knowledge I share because it really has come in very handy later on in my academic career. So let me stop here and pass it over to Vali. Vali, what do you want to add about this phase of your career? Can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I have
No,
like
that's okay.
a little.
No worries.
So I'm gonna talk about the departure too. For me, it's all about the curiosity. I think I do believe that curiosity is one of the most powerful forces driving humanity towards progress and innovation. From an early age, some people show interest in the world around them, like I don't know, like with the things that surround you, are trees, uh, whatever it's in your young life. For me, I remember that I always had questions about everything, questions about I don't know how things work, how this is possible, how why I'm here, why my mom is here, why she's my mom, like questions about everything since I was very, very young. And I do remember that I wasn't satisfied with superficial answers. I always wanted to know more, to understand why things work and how they work. Over time, my passion for research grew stronger. I became interested in different, like, I could say like different kinds of things, like science, biology, business administration, like things that will make me think about my future. And as I got older, I realized that I have like this source of skills that I could use. Like I was really good at searching, for example, researching in Google, and people kind of ask me to do things like, "Hey, can you search it? It's easier for you than it is for me." And I was like, "Okay," and I did it faster, and that's what I was realizing over time. Um, that's how I developed these skills that I was like, um, I understood that it was part of who I am because um, I'm a curious, I'm a curiosity person, and I think that's why I become what I am now.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Valley. So, the two of us are, we had a lot of the sort of the building blocks for scholarship, but, we weren't really quite scholars yet. And so we moved on to the second stage in our journey, which is what we call the initiation stage. So here's a difference between Valley and I. My academic life didn't start until I was in my mid 40s. I had spent 20 years in the private sector, and I actually remember very well the day I was walking my dog, and I remember the day when it occurred to me that if I didn't become a real academic, I would I would never be able to do it. So I had to act. I secured a position. My first appointment was at Stevenson University, just up the road from our university. But I also was able to teach at Johns Hopkins down in Washington, D.C. But I realized that I didn't have a PhD, and therefore I was a second-class citizen. And we'll talk about this in a little bit with Valley, because without a PhD, it really becomes in a lot of universities very difficult to move forward in many, not all, but many academic disciplines. So I went back, I got a PhD, and of course, when you do a PhD, you have to kind of do a dissertation, and that requires you to start to find your domain. And your domain is really the place where your passion intersects with what you're really good at. And so I thought about this and I said, well, okay, I knew two things. I knew finance for having worked as a banker, but I also was an entrepreneur. I had started all these startups. And so I thought, okay, that's my domain. That was sort of the phase one of my domain. Later on, I found a second phase, which is about this oligarch thing that Valley and I are on. We began to realize, or I began to realize, that this is something that very few people knew about. I knew a lot about it. And so I really began to focus my academic career on it. And that really, for me, was the conclusion of initiation. So Valley, what about you?
In my case, I feel like, as I told you before, I had like this sort of thing in my life, my whole life. But when I was in my last year of my undergraduate like my career. I did early admission in my major, and I did it in research because there are like two options. And I did it in research, and no, and there's like only two students there, but um, I feel like it was there like searching for a topic for my thesis, writing the thesis, and that's how it started.
Yeah, fantastic. So I mean, there's a certain parallelism between our scholarly journeys. I mean, obviously we're in different stages of our careers, but there's this common path. But up until now, those paths have been largely separate. So in the third phase of this journey, we sort of, and I think we both feel this way very strongly, we came home. And so how did this all happen? It was really quite serendipitous and magical. So I went to Colombia to do a Fulbright at Valley's University. And Valley was part of, there was a team of like 3 or 4 people that were responsible for, you know, working on that Fulbright. And when I met Valentina, I said, my God, this person is so incredibly smart, so incredibly curious, so incredibly switched on. And so we've got to figure out some way that we can work together in the future, because I frankly had never seen a potential collaborator quite like her. So last year, you know, as this book was developed and we got a contract, I went to Valentina and I said, okay, I'd like you to join me and be a co-author. And those of you who are academics already know that in most cases there's kind of a rank order of authors, but we really believed very strongly from the beginning that if our collaboration was going to work, it really truly had to be 50-50. And so that's how we organized it. That's how our contract is with our publisher. And that's how we've continued to work. We write these pieces in The Hill, primarily about Putin and his invasion of Ukraine, but also sometimes generally about oligarchs. We write those as co-equals. We're doing a course this summer at the university on oligarchs. It's based on our forthcoming book. And by the way, if you're looking for something fun to do this summer, please come and join the course. We're writing a conference paper, which we're going to give later this year in Poland. And we're also beginning to write an article for the Harvard Business Review, all based on our research. So you know, we've kind of merged our paths now and really are devoting most of our research attention to this joint enterprise. Valley, why don't you talk a little bit about the future, some of the stuff that we have in mind, both you personally and just generally?
We have in mind, or when I did my PhD, and of course, after finishing my major, we're thinking about maybe doing it in the United States, because here in Colombia there are not many places, but well, they are, but the quality is like, I want to also like to expand myself, like for other cultures, other ways to see the things we see here in Colombia. We're thinking also to create a research center. That's David's idea. Like, he actually believes that could work, and I believe in him. Also more books and articles. We're thinking maybe the next one is not only going to be an academic book, but it's going to be maybe a novel, maybe a story about, of course, an oligarch. And that's one of the latest David's ideas, to make a movie. But if you want to talk about it.
Yes, we're ambitious, and so one of the benefits I have living here in Los Angeles is that you just can't help but meet people in Hollywood and in the movie industry. So I've met a few producers who are the people that you need to talk to about these things, and shockingly enough, there's some people that are actually interested in doing a movie about oligarchs. And so Valley and I might find ourselves, having to pivot to the role of becoming screenwriters, which would be kind of a fun thing to do, which would also give us a chance to understand oligarchs a little bit better. So the thing is, we got a lot of stuff to do. And this is what a good academic partnership looks like. So we found, as we put this together, we came up with some lessons that we wanted to share, is for particularly for people that are just starting out. Valley, why don't you do the first one, because I think that really speaks to you a lot.
Okay. Well, I personally, I am like doing a lot of stuff at the same time because I have to study. I have classes from my major. I have to do my thesis. I work like full-time job here right now. So like I also have to write a book when we were writing, and kinda trying to have like a social and family life, not to forget my hobbies and that kind of stuff like mental health. So I do believe that that could be a big challenge for anyone, but it is possible to achieve it if you have like a good balance between these activities. It is important to have a balance in order to dedicate enough time to each of these tasks. For example, it is really important that you plan time and like to prioritize things, to establish like a schedule and dedicate specific blocks of time to each activity. For example, you can set aside a couple of hours for writing in the morning, then go to the work, then have classes at night, and weekends like dedicate time in evening, in the evening or like in the morning to research, to hanging out with friends. But I realize that it's also important to be realistic about what you can accomplish in a given day. And it's easy like to feel overwhelmed when you have a lot to do, but it's important to remember that you can't do everything at the same time. Like you have to organize yourself and your stuff. It's best to achieve the goals if you, for example, I feel like I'm a paper person, so I write my task in a agenda. Also, I think it's really important to take care of yourself so that you can manage the stress and the fatigue that can come from carrying out multiple activities. Like, I don't know, exercising, eating well, getting enough sleep, that kind of stuff that can avoid you to have a burnout. So in short, I do believe that it's really important to have a balance.
Yes, it's I think that's probably the most important lesson we have to share. I mean, that finding that balance is so challenging, I think, for all of us. And I know the pressures that Valentina finds herself under. And so finding that balance is especially challenging in her context. That some of the other lessons very quickly, because we want to make sure we have time for some Q&A. It's really important to embrace what's unique about you and make that your superpower. I'm pretty sure that Valentina and I are one of the most unique research partners combinations in the world right now, and that is our superpower. We see it when we go to do interviews. We were in El Salvador recently doing an interview with an oligarch, and I mean, I can't begin to describe to you in that setting how powerful it was to have the two of us sort of interviewing that person. It's important to lean into surprise and always stay outside your comfort zone. Valley and I are way outside our comfort zones. This kind of partnership is hugely atypical. Most of my academic partnerships are with, people with similar credentials to mine. And yet this has been the most productive academic partnership of my life. And it's important for all of us to remember, just in closing, to kind of engage with your stakeholders that you're researching, that you're not viewing them at a distance, to try to make a positive impact on them. And, you know, to kind of, when you find these kinds of academic partnerships, to really nurture them, because they don't come along very often. And so they're really special, and you should try to keep them growing. This is how the world becomes better, we believe. This is how you create knowledge, but it's also how the academic enterprise becomes and remains the special place that it is. So to kind of close out, believe it or not, we put together a little poem because Valentina and I do like to write, and so we've got a little poem to share. It's not a very good poem. We're not saying that it is, but it does kind of describe, kind of after Robert Frost's poem, what we see ourselves as researchers. So, two roads converged on a Bogota campus, and glad that we both could travel both and become one traveler. Long we stood and looked down that one road as far as we could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. And for us, the bends in the road have made all the difference. So thanks for listening to us. I'll take the slides down now, and we're looking forward to a lively Q&A. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all that with us, David and Valentina. So virtual round of applause for sure.
Thanks.
And I want you to know that I took a screenshot of the poem, and I'm going to ask Stephen Leva in the College of Arts and Sciences to rate it as a poem for you later. He might have
Oh
some
my God.
suggestions.
Oh, that's deeply disturbing.
Well, after feeling personally attacked by the importance to get enough sleep, given how little sleep I had last night, turnabout is fair play. So, Serena, you've got the first question.
Sorry, it was a clap.
Oh, it was a clap. Would you like to ask a question anyway?
Well, Jeffrey's got
Sure.
it.
Not Jeffrey. Serena, then Jeffrey. Go, Serena.
Sorry, I had the event up on two different screens because I'm insane. I'll just say that I love the presentation. It's almost like I want a research buddy. That'd be so fun. But it was very sweet to see two people collaborating in that way. And it's not a story that I hear much about. So I just really love the presentation. I thought it was very sweet, and it sounds very, very fun.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Serena. Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to put words in Valentina's mouth, but I think for us, it's been, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I've never had a partnership quite like this
one. Jeffrey?
Yeah, wonderful presentation, and some great lessons there, I think, for all of us, and maybe especially our students. I think my question maybe is more for you, David. So you've done some interesting things, your research here on oligarchs, and you had mentioned some on migration as well. Could you just talk a little bit, how does that inform your teaching, which seems very different kind of from business, but I'm sure you've made those connections, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Jeffrey, that's great. So first of all, I'm a very, very big believer in bringing our lived experiences into the classroom. I think that's vital. I mean, we see it with our students. They bring that into the class conversations, and I do the same. So there's a couple different dimensions. You know, as a former business person and of somebody who teaches business, I of course am drawing upon these examples, and the oligarch stuff, Jeffrey, is particularly interesting because we don't typically talk about these kinds of people in class, right? They're considered a little bit controversial, and indeed they should be considered that. And so I think a lot of my colleagues are nervous about talking about them. I mean, and you know, just to bring Valley into this, I mean, we even have to be careful about who we talk about. In our book, for example, we originally had an oligarch in Colombia who is an alumnus of Valentina's University, and he's a very powerful, very dangerous person. And so Valentina and I had a conversation about this, and we decided to take him out. So you have to be careful about how you talk about these people sometimes, but still, I think, Jeffrey, what I try to do, and I think what Valley and I are going to be doing this summer with this course, is to say this is part of reality in business. I mean, business is not just about making widgets or building apps. I mean, it's about dealing at this sort of nexus between wealth and power, and I think our students need to understand that if they want to be, successful in their careers.
Good question, Jeffrey. And you guys inadvertently answered Nelu's question from the chat, which was about drug cartels and danger.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Rebecca, I think, had her hand up. No, did I miss see that?
She
No.
did.
Oh,
She did.
I'll ask a question and maybe she'll come back in. Maybe she had to step away for something. I was just curious. You did mention that oligarch is a very ancient word that comes from the Greeks a little bit. How do you, and neither of you are historians by training, but I am just a little bit curious how you think that, like, this is not a new phenomenon. How is it why is it like more uniquely relevant now? Do you feel like there have been some recent changes, or like, do you kind of get what I'm driving at there?
Yeah.
Like, why is this different or important now than it was
Yeah.
in the past?
No, it's a hugely important question. And, Valley and I just hosted our publisher on campus a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this afterward, how relevant it is to the current moment that they're going to actually push up publication. So yes, oligarchs have been around for a very long time. Why do we see more of them now? I mean, the simple answer, and Valley, you correct me if I'm wrong about this, the simple answer is that there's a lot more uncertainty now than there was before, let's say around 1973. Remember the famous OPEC oil crisis? That seems to be a marker. And after that, you've seen sort of this secular rise in uncertainty, and oligarchs are particularly accomplished at exploiting uncertainty. Frankly, when Valley and I have written about Putin, for example, in The Hill, this is one of the things that has marked out our analysis from others. And I mean, not to toot our horns, but just to state a fact, our work gets read at the White House. I mean, because we take a very different view of Putin than other people have done, and we see him as an oligarch and as somebody who is really, really good at exploiting uncertainty. He's, to use a Silicon Valley term, he's a chaos monkey. He thrives on chaos. He really does, and so do all these people. Men, women, young, old, they're all types of oligarchs. So that's, Mike, I think what's different now is that the uncertainty in the institutional context of, neoliberalism, for example, really makes this like, this is the golden age of oligarchs, whether we like it or not.
Michael Shockett.
Thanks. So first of all, I just wanted to say I loved your use of the hero's journey as a way of, I hope everybody can, especially people who are, young researchers, can see themselves as a hero in that model. That was a very inspired choice of, I think, on your part. So I love that, and I wanted to thank you for that. And I wanted to ask a question specifically about, there's a lot of literature talking about, how having people work, from diverse backgrounds and diverse perspectives, makes everything better and more productive, and get some ideas. And you kind of alluded to that in your discussion. And I was just curious if you could if there's like a specific example you could share where like one or the other of you said something or had a thought that like was like completely off the other one's radar, that like, you know, just like example of I kind of want to, you know, like get like a little window into your creative process and see if there's, you know, something there that you can share where, you know, the other one said something that was, you know, completely off your radar and like inspired, you know, like a you know, I don't know, something that you developed later.
Okay, well, Michael, that's an awesome question. Valentina, I think this is a question maybe you can start to answer. No, because I do have a particular one, and this isn't really embarrassing, but like one of the great things about working with Valentina is that she periodically reminds me that I'm a gringo. I mean, she oftentimes she constantly says, you know, you're a gringo and you don't understand how things work here. And she's right. I mean, we until she came into the project, Latin America had very limited coverage. And yet I had this sort of instinct that, you know, Latin America is super important for the study of oligarchs. And so we open up this whole, you know, this whole continent really of oligarchic perspective, which was thing number one that Valentina contributed. The other thing is that you know, again, I think about the world very differently than Valentina does, and so there's a lot of different specifics that point that out. But the most important one is just, Michael, like we're being reminded to be humble, that you know we really don't understand very much about this, and that we always bring these perspectives into our research that are biased. So I think that's, Vali, is there anything else that I'm missing that you might add to that? Is that the number one? Yeah, okay. Is that, Michael, is that useful?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
It was kind of her to let you call yourself the gringo, I think. There. So we've got two more questions, and then I think we'll let you go because I know you have other commitments. So Rebecca has her hand up again, and then I think we can end with Nelu's question, which is one I kind of had too. So Rebecca.
I just wanted to thank you for this, because as an older student, I'm 42, and I noticed that there is a Renaissance story the first time in my 20s, and my perspective on everything was so jaded because it was so limited by my personal experiences. As I'm going through college now at my 40s, I'm like, okay, I have a game plan of what I want to do. What you said about finding people that share similar interests in you, and to make sure you develop a research buddy, because that holds you accountable, and it makes sure that you don't just say, oh, I want to do this and put it to the side. It's like you have to actively in it. And I was wondering if you were considering getting the school to start a program like that for, you know, for freshmen, incoming freshmen.
Ooh.
Oh, did we lose her?
Maybe it seems to stick, but you got the question. Like, are you
No,
going
I
to try
got
and
the
encourage the school to
question.
do this?
Well, I think that would be awesome. I think it would be, but at the same time, what I have to say is that, you know, it's serendipitous. I come back to what I mentioned earlier. You know, the way in which Valentina and I found one another as researchers was not something that you could plan out. And honestly, we sometimes talk about this. So it's harder to be programmatic about this, but I completely agree with you, Rebecca, that you know, there should be an encouragement made towards forming these kinds of, you know, unusual partnerships. These are outside the mainstream of academic, typical academic life, at least the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I've never heard of anything like it. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah.
And so the last question is kind of Nelu's question, and so it's, you know, do American billionaires controlling or influencing politics here in the United States fall under the oligarchs category? And I guess I would just ask you to broaden that a little bit, maybe, and say, like, how are you defining what an oligarch is? I feel like that's one thing I didn't quite hear you say, and I think it'd be an interesting way to end.
Mike, it's such a great question. It's part of the reason why research on them has really suffered over a long period. So neither Valentina nor I would pretend to be Aristotle, but basically what we've done in the book is to update Aristotle's definition which, you know, to put it in English, is the wealthy few who govern us. And govern can really be formally in terms of, you know, people holding positions of political power, but also informally, as you know, has been mentioned here in this question in the chat that you posed, which is to say that a lot of oligarch work is behind the scenes. I mean, the person that Valley and I took out of our book, whose name, by the way, is Luis Carlos Sarmiento, he works behind the scenes. I mean, he's never run for political office. He probably couldn't get elected, and so a lot of work like that is very oligarchic. So these people, you know, oligarchs basically acquire wealth or power, and then they use one to gain the other. I mean, that's our definition, and which requires you to have certain strategies that are distinctive, and which is what we lay out in the book. Just to answer the particular question, there are a number of American billionaires who are notable oligarchs. The one that we spend a fair bit of time on in the book is Charles Koch. Charles Koch of Koch Industries, in our judgment, is probably one of the most consequential American oligarchs in modern times. Frankly, in my judgment, he's more important than people to whom we pay more attention, like Donald Trump. Because what Koch has done is he's created this tremendous infrastructure of support, institutional support, backed by tremendous financial resources, that has promoted this sort of radical right-wing agenda, which, you know, Jane Meyer, among others, have laid out in her work. So I think that there's no question that these people that work behind the scenes are critical. And just to take it to one final step, Mike, then there are the people that change how we think and act. And I think in many ways, the most notable figure in this regard is somebody like Larry Page at Google. Because if you think about it, what Google has done in terms of how we globally think and act is incredibly profound. That's not a new insight that Valley and I came up with. I mean, Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard Business School wrote about this a few years ago, and very really great work. So we see the ones that are out front, but we also see the ones that are kind of lurking behind.
Well, that was really, really interesting. And I'm glad we ended with that. I have a follow-up question, but I see you all the time, so I'll ask you another time.
Okay, you can do it anytime.
So thank you both for coming and talking to us today. I knew a little bit about what you were going to say, but it was far more interesting than I could have imagined. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it was really well suited to this audience. So one last time, another round of applause for David and Valentina. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with us. And I'm going to hold you to your promise to judge next year, by the way.
Yeah, I will. Well, and maybe I can rope Valentina into it too.
More judges is not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's right. The more the merrier.
Okay, everyone, we have
right,
one
thanks.
last suite. Yep, we have one last suite of student projects, but once again, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break while I kind of cue them up. So 12:55, we'll get started.